Hi After School Builders, Happyakrz here, and for April we're going to be celebrating Earth Day. Earth Day is actually April 22nd, and it's a day that we celebrate the planet and our natural resources, and we focus on recycling programs and air quality and just doing our best to make sure that our planet is taken care of, because without it we wouldn't be here. And so when I saw that Earth Day was going to be one of the themes from the after school program, I remembered that I had seen this kit online on Jason Allmann's website. Now you may remember Jason Allmann is the same Lego master builder who developed our Pi Day combination safe. He decided that he wanted to do something in the way of an orrery. It's a weird word, orrery, O-R-R-E-R-Y. And what an orrery is it's a model, a working model of how planetary motion takes place. So in this case, he wanted to develop an orrery that was really just the Earth, Moon, and Sun. And so he set out to do that, and what he created, what he ended up with, and very fortunately for us, put the instructions online so that we could build it, is a fantastic, really surprisingly accurate model of a Earth and Sun orrery, planetary system. What you're going to really enjoy, I think, in this build is the number of gears that we are going to be dealing with. Now, I'm not really good with mathematics and gear physics. I want to get better at it. This model makes me want to get better at it because there are so many gears. It's a pretty simple build. And following the instructions should be no problem for you. But when you start to see how this thing works and how the gears work in relation to each other to make these things move, it is really something impressive. So you can see that there are gears all over the place on the inside. They're just everywhere. And every one of them is important and necessary to get the movements the way that we'll see when we actually rotate the crank. So for a second, I want to talk about the accuracy of this orrery. Now, for a typical day for the planet Earth, a day is one rotation on our axis. And it just happens that he built it so that one rotation of the crank, one full rotation, is one full rotation of the Earth. So one crank equals 1 day. The moon actually goes around the planet in real life every 27.23 days. In this model, it goes around every 28 cranks or every 28 days. So that's really close to accurate. The sun also, I wasn't even aware of this, but the sun also rotates. It's not a solid object. It's, kind of flowing magma. But the center portion of the sun does rotate, and it goes around in a complete circle about every 24.47 days. On this kit, it actually rotates at every 25 days. So every time you crank this thing, it takes 25 cranks, and that sun goes all the way around. Now you'll notice too that this arm is swinging when I crank, and that's to indicate the year. So in a real life, the Earth goes around the sun every 365.256 days. On this model, he got the gears to work so that it's 375 days, which is still 97% accurate to real life. So when you crank this model and the Earth spins, the sun spins, the moon goes around the Earth, and the Earth and moon go around the sun, that is a crazy number of gears to have all working in union to make a model that's 97% accurate. So what I want you to do is enjoy building the kit. but just really enjoy and maybe even look into other kits that have gears that help to create mathematical scenarios like this, because to be able to create something that operates so close to reality is it's just genius. And Jason Allemann, my hat is off to him, although I'm not going to take my hat off. But he is just a brilliant master builder. I'm so impressed with this kit. I hope you enjoy it. We'll have a couple more coming in end of April and May that will round out the rest of the year. But for now, let's build this orrery. Let's have some fun and build on. As I mentioned in the intro, what makes this kit really special is the number and types of gears that are involved. We have a lot of them, all different sizes, and they work together just beautifully. The majority of this kit is going to be built from technique pieces, whether it's lift arms or connector pieces. The two planetary bodies, the Sun and the Earth, will be made out of small plates, but everything else is really pretty much gears, technique connectors, and some lift arms. You'll also notice there are two sets of turntables, a large turntable and a small turntable. I've rarely had the opportunity to use these types of parts other than in things like technique cranes. But in this case, they really add to the opportunity or the ability to rotate the planets on their axes. During the opening of this kit, you saw me pull out several of the bags of parts. And while I was parting these out into the tray, I realized that I had missed two bags. I wanted to get this recording done early. Before I had actually packed all the boxes. So there were two bags, two sets of parts that had not been added to the kit yet. So you will see as I break a couple times where I add an additional bag of parts. That's just because I hadn't fully packaged all of the kits for you students yet. But I was able to make sure that everything got into the video. So in parting out, I would say definitely just look for the smaller pieces. The technique bag can go into your tray and these smaller flat round tiles. Everything else is pretty easy to manage just on your workstation or your desktop. So no need to get too worried about space in your trays. The original instructions that I downloaded from Jason Allemann's website for this kit were a little too detailed, and they left out a couple of important steps that I felt were going to be important for you guys in the after-school program to be able to successfully complete the kit. So I recreated the instructions, and we'll walk through them with you both in the PDF file and in this video. But I've broken them down into smaller steps so that really if you follow along,
There should be no difficulty in making sure that every technique part, every gear, and every plate goes in the right place. For the addition of this first large gear, you're going to want to make sure that when you place the axle through it, that it doesn't go all the way through just to the edge, because you need to slide this into place first, then push the axle through. That way you get under the other wedge gear. And don't worry if this small gear that we've just installed doesn't connect, or the teeth don't connect with the larger gear. It's not supposed to yet. So if those don't connect and turn together, that's fine. And here I'm about to try to show you that all of the axles are flush on the bottom, but by turning it, one of them fell out. So putting it back in there, basically I'm just trying to show you that those axles should all be flush across the bottom. At the completion of step 6, you can now see that we have 3 different sections of gears, each that work independently. They're not supposed to work with each other yet, but they will as we continue to build. Here's a little trick I use sometimes when I need to get an axle through a gear or through a technique piece, but I need to make sure it's only 1 unit's width. I'll use an extra lift arm, and I'll size the gap to that lift arm before I actually attach it to the necessary piece. It's just an easy little trick to get the right measurements. With the inclusion of the gears in step 7, you can now see that we've combined 2 of our gear groups so that the turning of the crank actually is now working 2 of them. And now with the completion of step 8, when we turn the crank, we now activate every gear on the assembly so far. In step 13, we'll be adding the first of our turntable sets, and as you can see, the two halves are made up of a black part and a light bluish gray part. And when you put those two pieces together, make sure you hold them evenly and snap them together until they click and they move freely with each other like this. That's a successful turntable assembly. And here is the second bag of parts that I had not originally put in the box at the beginning of the video, but I'll quickly get these sorted out and we'll keep building. In step 19, we're adding the second of our turntables, the smaller of the two, and the process is exactly the same. Hold the two pieces, the two halves, evenly, press them together until they snap, and then they should rotate smoothly. Step 22 can be a little tricky if you try to do everything while it's still connected to the frame. So as we've seen in the past with other models, I have no problem taking a piece off of the built portion if we can make sure that we can get everything back on the right way. So as you can see right now, having a hard time getting the axle through the hole on that connector piece. So it's easier just to take it off, slide the axle through, get the gears in place. As long as we can put that axle, the new assembly, onto the previous part with no trouble. So I'm going to finish the assembly of this section, and I'm going to go ahead and add it back on where it belongs before finishing the step. And now that I have the axle in place, I have an axle extender in the way. So I'm going to take that off, add the new gear to the end of that axle, and then I'll place that extender back into position. Step 23 is another interesting situation where you're going to need to feed the axle through the holes in the small turntable, and then you're going to connect that to the gear that you're holding, but you have to fit the gear in position above the other pre-existing gear. That's the only way to get this in place, and then press the axle through. At this stage of the build, it may feel a little flimsy and pieces may not be completely connected with each other. That's okay. We will be continuing to add more pieces that stabilize the whole assembly. Sometimes getting all of the new parts assembled onto the main body can be frustrating or a little tricky. Don't get worried about it and just stay calm, stay patient. It's really all about just being persistent and knowing what you want the outcome to look like. So in this case, I'm trying to get this assembly in place so that the new black gear is close to the body, but that I'm not crimping where the yellow half bushes and the red extenders are. I'm trying to keep those with a gap. So it takes a little bit of patience, and you just have to keep working at it to make it look just right. Don't freak out. It's easy enough to just take your time, be patient, and get it done. Here's a great example of why we need to do things in the right order. In trying to get this new axle with the worm gear on it into position, I allowed that part to come off of the assembly, and getting it back on because of the gear that's involved is going to be quite difficult. So you'll see here as I struggle to try to get to that lift arm on with the smaller axle and small gear on there, trying to get it past the worm gear. Eventually I do it, but here's a great example of why perhaps in this case you want to make sure that that piece stays on when you're adding the new axle in step 30. As always, you can always refer to the PDF file to see how the parts should go together, and use the video just as a reference point to find out how I got to the same spot. Step 34 is a good example of something working theoretically in the instructions, but practically, when you try to add this new gear assembly onto the larger body, it doesn't work because the small black gear that's on that new part won't fit into the slot available because there are other pieces in the way. So the best way to resolve this issue, as you'll see as I'm investigating this, I end up taking off the upper assembly of the gear system, like so. I take the small little piece that we've just added and I actually remove the black gear. Now, when I try to place the assembly back in place and the new addition onto it, it works. So I know that everything can be attached properly. Now that I have that new portion assembled, I can add the black gear back again by sliding it into the interior, onto the axle pin. It works, it's fine now, and it can go back onto the lower portion of the gear assembly. Again, just a strange order in which to build things, and I really could not come up with a better solution in the PDF file that would make sense for every builder. So between the video and the PDF file, just use both as a reference point and you should be able to get this together without any issues. In step 35, we need to do another slide before we actually attach. So we're going to take the gear, slide it inside the body, roughly to where it's going to be positioned. Then we can throw the axle through it and pin it in place so that everything is affixed properly. Now you can see that one gear actually created the connection between the different sections of the gear system, so that now we have all gears in all systems activated when we turn the crank. With that step completed, we've now finished the primary gear system and we can begin building the base in step 36. In step 44, we're going to add the gear assembly to the base. This assembly takes place from the bottom lift arm, connecting into the two 2x2 plates with upward pin. You'll also notice, as I'm about to point out, that the axle that was installed on the base is now going to mount inside the small red 1x2 technique connector. At this stage in the construction, we still have the ability to remove the upper portion of the gear assembly. So here I just wanted to show you what the base and lower portion of the gear assembly should look like before replacing the upper portion. In step 45, we're going to be adding one gear, and in the original instructions, this was so difficult. But because we can still remove the top portion, we can place that gear right on the axle very simply. As you can see here, it just sits right on top of the axle that we had originally installed onto the base. Now we replace the upper portion of the gear assembly, and step 45 is done. We now have a completely operational gear assembly for the orrery. We just need to stabilize it in the next couple of steps and then build our Earth and Sun and Moon. In step 46, we're going to be adding four 3L connector pins with bushes. You want to make sure that when you place these in the lift arm that you press firmly so that they click all the way through and connect with the lower portion of the turntable inside. This is what actually stabilizes the turntable and the gear assemblies, so that from this point forward, the upper and lower portions cannot be separated. In step 47, we're going to begin building the four stanchions that will kind of frame the gear assembly on the base. It will create a lot of stability for the model, as well as add a little bit of architectural decoration. In step 49, we're going to add our stanchions into the 2x2 round plates with the axle hole. Make sure you press these until they're really firmly seated. Once they're in place, you can turn the connector element at the top until it's facing into the lift arms of the gear assembly. But first, you just want to make sure that these get really well seated into the base so that they create a nice foundation for stability. And with the addition of these 3L connector pins with bush through the stanchions and into the assembly, you can see how much more stable the base is now once you're turning the crank. We now have an assembly that is very stable and can support the sun and moon and earth above. As we begin to assemble all 6 sides of our planet Earth, you'll see me use a couple different techniques on this first step with the 2x2 corner plates. I try it several different ways to see what's the easiest. Lining them up on the desk and then trying to press the round plate on top. That seems to do okay. Sometimes I add one plate at a time to the round plate, and that works okay. It's really up to you, whatever is most comfortable. When adding the 1x4 plates, I find it best usually to pick up both the assembled portion and the 1x4 plate and add it, because doing that tends to break it. If you press down in the center, there's no stability in the middle. So it's easier if you lift up the whole assembly and then add your 1x4 plates. The red bush that we're adding in step 55 has a notched side on only one side. So that's the side that you want to press down between the knobs on the round plate. With the bottom and one side of the planet now complete, including the interior support system, you'll find that as you build, each additional side of the globe will create more stability so that when you're finished with the globe, you can actually press on each side, not really tightly, but pretty tightly, to make sure that everything is well seated. And with the addition of the top panel on the planet, we now have a planet Earth that looks pretty good. We tighten it up, make sure everything's seated well, and then we can add it to the rest of the model in step 73. In step 74, we begin the build of the sun. And while this is a slightly larger orb, the style and construction of the sun is very similar to what we did with the Earth. There are going to be 6 sides with 2 pieces on the interior as internal structure for stability. And here in step 75, we are building the first of those 2 internal structures just so that we can add the exterior panels to it that will end up making the sun. In step 78, we begin to build the bottom panel of the sun, one of 6 sides. And this one actually is where we attach the sun to the gear rig that we've already completed. So this is the only side of the sun that will have some additional parts towards the end. Once this panel of the sun is done, the remaining 5 panels are exactly the same. I just go through each step and show how they're built. But this is the only one that's really different because of its connection to the base and that connection onto the model rig itself. One of the great engineering feats of the Lego design is the fact that the parts are affixable not only on the knobs on the plates, but sometimes in between them. And in step 84, we're adding 4 black round 1x1 plates, or buttons like I call them. And unfortunately, as you can see, I am having a horrible time getting the second button in place. When you try to add these plates in between the knobs instead of on top of them. Sometimes it is very difficult. Just stay patient, perhaps ask for help from a neighbor, from a supervisor, but just stay with it because they will eventually go in and they look great once they're in place. It's sometimes just a little difficult. In step 98, we start the next side of the sun, and since we've already finished one complete side and the rest of them are duplicates of that first, I've sped up the film just a little bit so that we can move quickly through them. They should all be built exactly the same way, the same order of steps. So if you want to slow it down, just go back and watch the previous, the very first side panel. Otherwise, just go at your own pace. And with the completion and addition of the upper panel to the sun, we now have a complete solar assembly that can be added to our model. In the same way that we did with the Earth, you just gently press straight down so that the bush on the bottom of the sun affixes to the axle below. And as we crank, we see both the sun and Earth rotating on the axes. We also see the bar moving around the Earth where the moon will be installed in the next step. And in step 123, we finally add our small technique ball to the post, and we have an orbiting moon. Our orrery is now complete, and with patience, we could actually crank through an entire year, 365 days worth, or 375 full turns of the crank. As we know, the model is 97% accurate. And now we've got something that you can show off to your friends and family, and just be inspired by such real genius by a Lego master builder like Jason Allemann. This has been a fantastic experience for me. I hope it has been for you as well. It's a great kit that shows a lot of ingenuity, a lot of creativity, and I hope you all had a lot of fun building it along with me. Until next time, build on.